This podcast is about learning to grow, challenging my notions of philosophy, psychology, government, money, and power. Join me as I interview people with controversial ideas and lifestyles, and decide for yourself what you believe in. My name is Greg, and this is Contra.
This week's guest is Elisha Almeida. We delve into her experiences working with troubled youth and talk about some of the different social pressures and contradictory expectations placed on modern men and women. Elisha has been a very interesting person to get to know. I've learned a lot from her about compassion and come to believe she's deeply integrated some of the most powerful aspects of her feminine self. I hope you can take away something from our conversation. Hey, Elisha, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Yeah, very good. We just had like a 2-hour conversation before this, but yeah, there's actually a couple of specific things I wanted to kind of ask you about. Mm-hmm. I've only talked to you a couple of times, but we're both super interested in the idea of consciousness. And the last podcast I had, I talked a lot about like physical practices. So I thought it'd be like really suiting to have one where we go, the complete opposite end of that and really talk about consciousness and the way it's formed. So,
Interesting.
You specifically, because I talked to a lot of people about these ideas, but because you have that insight into youth, when we were chatting and I realized you were a youth worker, that's when I was like, oh, this would be a really cool person to have that chat with. Because that's kind of an area of my life where I don't have any expertise. I have some ideas. I'm always leery to tell people about them because if people get offended if you mention anything about parenting and you're not actually a parent, right? Like the whole I'm a mom, therefore I'm an expert mom. It's well, I think there's a spectrum of competence for everything. But yeah. So anyway, can you tell me a little bit about what you do or what you did when you were working with youth?
In terms of consciousness in youth, I find personality is one of the biggest ones that I kind of get first when I meet a youth. And I like them because they're really honest. So the honesty part of their personality helps me get closest to understanding more of their consciousness.
Okay. Yeah.
When we meet people, we meet them with different masks or layers. And with youth, the fascinating part about working with that cohort group is that there's not very many layers because they just don't know how to bullshit.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
So you meet a lot of young people that, you're able to see more of who they are, and they're, you got to take some time getting to know them and building relationships, but you get to feel the essence of who they are, I find.
Yeah, that's funny because I almost think that it's like a bell curve is actually the wrong thing, but that it's, you have that authentic self when you're young because you don't have the skill to cover it up. Then you gain the skills to hide it. And later, if you reach this point in your life, you try to start peeling back those layers to really expose who you are. And it's something over the last few years I've really deliberately tried to cultivate is conversations with people where I'm not just interacting with a mask. I'm not just interacting with their projection of who, what they want to be perceived as. Yeah. Because I've definitely been guilty of that. And, we all are.
Yeah, we all are. I think our society builds us up as, we're I think in some ways I personally have I've had a perception of what it is to be a girl, a woman, this worker, or we have ideas of how it is that we're meant to be, and it has taken me. I've had the same kind of journey where I've had to peel back the layers to find out who I am, and working with youth have definitely helped me in that way. Because if they see it, they call it out. I can't go through, say for instance, I'm having one of days that every human has, where it's not my most highest day. I'm having an okay day, or perhaps it's the weather's not that great outside and I'm having a little bit more of you may say a sad day, and I'm going
Yeah.
to pick up one of my youth. Well, they can tell. They can tell. It's like, why are you like that, right? So what I'm trying to say is that they can pick it up, and so they call you to be more of who you are,
Right,
and that's been why.
But you think like adults could pick it up, but they just wouldn't be
I
forthright
don't
enough
think.
to
I don't
say
think.
it?
I think adults have a certain way of speaking, or that's acceptable in our society, whereas you don't call it the obvious genius. Like you don't you get taught that's not the kindest way to do, or maybe you shouldn't say that. And depending on the certain family structure that you're in, certain things get taught out of you or encouraged. So hoping that you meet the right people along the way that encourage the right authenticity, that's when you will stay authentic, right?
Yeah. And I do see like, society is by its nature, it's an oppressive force, but I also don't think it's necessarily bad to be like, manipulated in that way necessarily. I think it's a necessary evil in that, like, if you want to be the most creative chef out there, the path is not just to start messing around in the kitchen. And just like, oh, I just want to be myself. It's like, well, you suck at cooking. Like you need to study and like get really good at French cooking, like proper French cooking.
Right.
And then once you've earned the right, once you've earned it, then you can start experimenting. Then you can start expressing. Then it opens you up. Like, you have to become an expert at yoga before you can start inventing your own moves, because nobody's going to do great yoga because it's just bullshit, right? Like,
yeah, right. And I'm in agreement. I think structure is important, and so that's why I think when we come to, if I have to come back to talking about youth, it's but how can you provide some sort of structure, because they are wanting structure. I think as humans we crave some sort of structure, in my experience. But at the same time, you want to preserve authenticity and honesty, So it's a fine dance of how to do that and how to hold that, because you don't want. I think young people are more wanting to fit in and more wanting to be accepted, And so, how can they preserve their uniqueness yet also coexist, integrate, be in community, be with others, and how to do that, So can you dial back the honesty just a tiny bit? You don't have to tell that person you don't like their shirt, you don't have to tell that person, well, you disagree with your agreement or disagree with their statement with like, how can you do it in a kinder way?
Yeah,
how can
you don't have to be vehement.
And like, how can you have a little bit more compassion for somebody and try and understand them versus just get to that point where you can't see eye to eye. So teaching those kind of skills and teaching people to see who they are and preserve their uniqueness and not look for constant reassurance between who you are and who the person beside you is,
Yeah. Well, I like what you said there about kind of criticizing, like pointing out the flaw in another, but doing it with compassion. And I think, what a symptom of in our kind of university culture, which is kind of representative of our, up and coming youths and positions of authority, you see them doing these big call outs, but there's no attempt at compassion. There's no attempt at understanding.
Right.
It's purely just like on the attack. I feel like, that's representative, the opposite extreme of what you're talking about. Like, it's not like, let's understand what a Donald Trump supporter is, going through and, why they're hurting and why they feel the need to get this, obviously mentally ill man, like in charge. Like, it's just like a hatred. And I think that's like a childish regression almost.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think that's because of it's the shadow, right? It's the part of us that we don't want to see. And if you heard of this, if you spot it, you got it, So if you spot it in somebody, chances are you embody that quality in some way.
Yeah.
That's why it makes you edgy, or it makes you have that adverse reaction.
Yeah.
And can you see, if you start to see the parts of you that are bothered by the parts of another, like if their anger or frustration or the way if that bothers us in some way, like how can I see, is that something that I embody? And if I have that quality, it's only from there that I can have compassion. Because compassion can't develop if you don't, have been through that circumstance.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think they're young enough that they're, to take on another's perspective like that, it takes a little bit of like practice, know?
Because I could see that. Like you're saying basically that compassion is kind of a type of empathy.
Yeah.
And to empathize with somebody, like to empathize with him, say a man who is like very angry, you have to recognize the times that you've been irrationally angry and then have compassion, even if you feel like, hey, this is just an irrationally angry jerk and I hate him. It's like, well, you know what? You've been there too.
Yeah. And I think that changes the way you react. I mean, you go from lashing out to perhaps setting a very firm boundary, and how you would then converse with them would be different, right? And so I think youth they experience things quite, how would I say, deeply, everything is very expansive. Their emotions are very expansive at that age, and you like prior to being 18, you were 17, 16, 15, 14,
Yeah.
And so those are not very many years that you can kind of fall back on in terms of experience, So they're still learning about these different emotions. They're still learning how it feels within them and how to navigate them. So they're an interesting group to work with and fascinating. I've learned so much,
Yeah.
There's so much of the peeling back the layers,
Have you tried to create the conditions to foster that honesty while also kind of, repressing that the more nefarious aspects of people's personality?
So I think it like vulnerability is a huge factor. I think I offer in the way I look at a client is always with compassion, and there are some things that I have to reveal about myself in order to be able to work from that space of that if I offer something that I'm vulnerable in, or a story of my life, that I went through, chances are they're going to open up to me and present that authentic true self that I'm really wanting to work with. That's the core,
Yeah, you know what? And I feel like a lot of people, because sometimes youth they're not as sophisticated as an older person because they don't have those layers of experience, but we're all very good at detecting bullshit at every age. And if you were trying to bullshit that authentic experience, like, hey bro, I've been there, and throw your hat sideways and hike your pants down and just kind of like pretend you're like, I was where you're at, and like not give the real authentic pain you felt as youth, they would sniff that shit out instantly. Yeah.
And there are some times that, the youth that I've worked with have experienced much more than I have in so many ways. Their life have been so different. And so I cannot relate. And I say that, like, I mean, I haven't had this experience, but this is the experience that I have had. And this is what I have gathered. And your experience is going to be your own. But what can you gather from it? Like, I work with certain tenets. I mean, certain things that I'm big about is awareness, responsibility, and honesty. Okay. If they can, I encourage those three things in the work that I do, and for each client to meet me halfway, and I've had the honor to work with some really interesting humans, and each of them have their own unique expression, and that's the fascinating part, is that we all are unique in our own ways. And I think in so many ways, I think we can learn a lot from youth, that group of people, because I think that fierce is definitely one. They're very opinionated, and they're still at that point where they haven't been they have been depending. They've been influenced, yes, but they still have. They're still looking for self-expression. They're looking for self-identity.
Yeah.
They're still at the forming stages of life, and they are the future of our society.
I mean, well, we were talking before, we're both still, at the forming stages of our lives, for sure. I think, the second you say, well, whether it's one particular aspect or life in general, that, hey, I'm a master of this, that's, when I think you really need to do a gut check, right? Like the person who's a perpetual student is the real master. Yeah, I love when I talk to somebody that's, been doing something for 30 years and they just have a real humble way about it. I don't have that. But yeah.
Yeah, student for sure. I think you're always a student teaching the things that you've learned. You're always on a spectrum of a student. I don't know. It's my perception.
Yeah. So what's the youngest people you've worked with?
My youngest has been 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're really, well, not that trouble can't hit at any age, but it's really people that have gone through trauma of some sort are reacting to that.
Yeah. Oh, the 13-year-olds that I meet are mostly struggling with like social skills at school, trying to find their voice, or they're struggling with attending. So
not all of them have gone through trauma necessarily.
I mean, they've had certain things that have happened in their life that influences those aspects of like not going, like, it's never I'm not going to school because I just don't want to go, right? It's layered, and you got to build a relationship in order to figure out what are the layers underneath that and why.
And this idea that you put forth is revealing something, a vulnerability that you have. Is it always like something personal and painful, or could it be something personal and joyful? Or like, what do you find makes people open fastest?
It's always, I think, so it comes up in a conversation. So I'd be having a conversation with them and they share an experience, and then an experience of my own would come to mind. And I find that the experiences I usually share they have some sort of humor to it in the end, or they're deep in their insight. They have some sort of insight, some sort of takings, if they'd like to take the takings from them, but that's the way that I usually present it. So like, because we want to bond on some sort of similarity.
Yeah.
If we can find, as I think the way humans connect is like, hey, you do this, I do this too. So let's like, oh, cool. So I could trust this human now. And that's like some deep relationship building, But so you're looking for similarities, they're looking to see whether they can I identify with this person? Can I relate? Is there any sort of relatability?
Yeah. And I like that. I think that relatability comes down to storytelling. And I think that's a really good strategy. Something I learned from my grandfather. Because it's so easy to lecture somebody on how they should be doing, like living their life. Yeah. And it's almost impossible. Like data should be compelling. Like if you see that like, oh, hey, I'm just making this up, but let's say 80% of, teenagers that are killed in a drunk driving accident. It doesn't actually make you that much less likely to drink and drive. It should. Like that should be the most compelling thing. Whereas instead, if you actually relay some anecdote about how you had a friend that got drunk and drove, and they truly relate with that character, that's what's compelling. Yeah. Because they can emotionally put themselves in that position, like empathy, what we were talking about before.
Yeah. And also deep care and love, right? Like they need to understand that you care about them. And do
you ever have a client that you don't care about? Have you ever had somebody that you're just like, fuck this guy?
No,
really?
No. I mean, most of the clients that I get, I think the one thing that you need to have, I would say, and I don't mind saying this, you need to have heart to do this job. Sure. It's a heart job. It's not like if you're doing physical labor, you're using your body,
Mm-hmm.
and this job requires heart, I find,
So you've always, like, somebody, no matter how much of a bad actor they're being,
Mm-hmm.
you've always been able to empathize with, like, the part about them that you respect and like or love.
Because I think what I've found is that humans don't love themselves,
Okay.
What I mean by that is I've played a lot of hardball.
With yourself?
And with youth.
Okay.
With youth. And probably with myself, if I have to be honest. It takes a while for these relationships to be built in this way that they challenge you. They're challenging. Everybody wants to show you all the parts that they don't think are lovable first.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what I mean by hardball. It's like, these are the things that I did wrong. That's bad, right? Like, that's what I usually get. It's like, this is the way I fucked up. It's bad, right? Like, and they look at me like they didn't do something, like it's horrible. And I'm like, yeah, it is, but let's have this conversation when you're in a different space, because it's there's a lot of pushing boundaries. There's a lot of like, I'm gonna test to see if this person's gonna still be around if I do this, and if I do this, and
especially because they probably have their own abandonment issues.
Right.
A lot of these kids.
Right. Right. And so I've learned a lot about myself, and doing the work with myself allows me to go do this work with other humans. Because you can't do this work without not doing the work by yourself, like you can't go to these spaces. I mean, you can, but you end up taking it personally, and it's not a personal thing to take.
Yeah. Well, I find it funny that kind of abandonment thing with youth, that they almost, the thing that we fear the most, if we haven't dealt with it, we actively are agents working to bring it about in our own lives.
Oh yeah.
If you haven't come to terms with that, it's like that Jungian idea, coming terms with the shadow, right? Like knowing the worst parts about yourself allows you to like understand them and avoid them. Whereas if you think that you're not whatever negative personality trait, then you're actually going to act that out because you haven't come to terms that it exists within your consciousness.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, understanding our shadow is the way we will embrace our light, You gotta, I get intimate with it, figure out what parts of it you see yourself in there, and then you understand where the essence of you, the true essence of your heart is light, but that takes some journeying,
Yeah. So these kids that are kind of trying to push you away, trying to, by, giving the examples of the negative things they've done, is it, once you get to the core of it, do most of them want to get better? Like, do they want to, I don't mean just, I guess I mean like fit into society, because, not to imply like, maybe the best path for them is to go live at some surf camp and be a beach bum and totally exit from society. But do most of them want to, at their core, adapt and like fit in?
Yes, I find that the youth that I work with are the misfits. They're they're trying to fit in, and they don't fit in, and they don't know how to fit in. They don't know how to take the personalities that they have, or whatever labels that they've been given, either in the form of a mental illness or somehow something. They don't know how to use those things and make themselves fit in. And that's exciting to me when in this way I say it's exciting because permission, you're looking for, well, how do I be this and still exist? Like, how do I hold a job? How do I build relationships with other humans? How do I do this thing called life and still be who I am? And so it takes a little bit of, no, you don't have to drop everything about who you are in order to integrate and be among our functioning citizens of society. No, you don't.
How do you drop some?
Yeah, you got to get honest about some, right? Like, maybe not all my youth are going to go through university, you know, maybe, yeah. And what is, I don't push for one way for them to be. I just kind of open up my palm and I'm just like, well, who is it that you desire to be? Yeah. I ask questions like, you know, I spend time asking them about their dreams and holding that up when they're in these spaces of deep sadness so that they can aspire to get there. Right?
Yeah. So they actually articulate what it is they want.
Yeah. And I think my job ends up being holding up that dream to them so that they can keep moving through these trials in their life. Because humans, we're going through the wave. We're going through different emotions. We have different obstacles. We have different things in our lives that we're learning, right? And so just to have somebody that's just going to hold something for you.
I think that's a great service because you basically pick up their own dream and hold it up as a beacon.
Yeah, that's it.
Rather than
that's it.
Whereas the more typical thing. I'm curious actually if this is what approach is more popular in your field. Mm-hmm. Would the typical approach just be like, here's your dream? It's to go to university, to get a 9 to 5, and then try to motivate them with this thing that they never even asked for.
Right. And see, that's I think a difference, because I think that somehow gets put into our culture and into our school systems, and it's an embedded way of being, and I think that creates what I end up getting as clients are the outliers, what I'm calling the non-fitting in individuals, they're very aware of that fact that they don't, right? But they're wanting to. And so how do you bridge that gap? And permission first, okay, well, what is it that you desire to do? What do you want to start doing? Like, what are some of the characteristics of who you are, which is, okay, what are your strengths? Okay, you're a hard worker, you want to do physical labor. Okay, we'll get you into something like this. And then, your job becomes your motivator.
Yeah.
Regardless of the fact that you have, you're struggling with depression, you're struggling with an addiction or whatever it may be, like you're able to focus on your job because you've now found something that gives you meaning. So how do you help someone find meaning in their life? Because we all seek meaning.
For sure. Yeah. I totally agree. I think there's that kind of modern new agey, like happiness seeking thing. And I think a lot of people have that. Like, oh, of course you just want to be as happy as possible. It's like, well, I think that's a relatively new idea. I don't think, our grandparents and generations of humans, like, were just saying like, well, you just want to be as happy as possible. And that's obviously the key to life. I don't think we should be so flippant with like accepting that. And I like that. I mean, we both listen to Jordan Peterson. So we're a bit, I don't know if biased is the right word, but we have that idea incepted. But yeah, I think that's great. And I think our society actually gets a hit. There's things like this where, there's kind of that obvious path where people are kind of funneled into. But I think the great thing about especially Canadian society is that we have all sorts of spaces for people.
Right.
There's so many different ways that you can fit into society. Now, some concessions are necessary, right? Like you can open up a vegan yoga studio, and that's the great thing I believe about the free market. And if people are interested in it and you do a good job, they're going to come. Yeah. You don't have to go to university. I mean, now we have a few things that are like, I could say people might say BS, like you have to get a permit to do that, a business license, and pay taxes, and that's not total freedom, but I do think there is a price to pay for our society, and I think that's kind of part of it. And it's efficient, and I think those processes should be minimized as much as they can, but I do believe like at some level of bureaucracy is a bit of a necessary evil. Yeah, I mean it exists. It's a system that we have that's in operation, right? Yeah. So how do you with clients I get, I'm constantly trying to find out what it is that they desire to do, like I said, and then
it doesn't have to be in the category of big or small or successful. It's like, well, you're going to make my dad said this to me when I was speaking to him the other day. We make our own fortune.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you're granted certain cards in life, and you do what you do to make your fortune. You know, so what are you going to do with the things that you've had and the experiences that you've had?
Yeah.
You know, what is it that you want to offer or give this world, or where do you feel like you can put your gifts out? You know, let's talk about refining those gifts and putting it out. You know, and it's just about finding people that can encourage that, so that you can go in that direction. And I think it would be great if we'd had more of those people that are wanting to see what it is that person wants to do versus what I want that person to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there is like a outreach for that. I hear people talking more about like high school classes where it would just be like personal finances and you know, simple business finances, because that's one thing I think we kind of do a poor job, because there's, you know, I think public school, people knock it, and you know, for many of the right reasons, but what it is essentially like you're taking somebody and kind of like smashing them into a mold, and like these are the skills you need to fit in our society.
Yeah.
Whereas I think it's been a little bit warped now, and like some of these skills, like, hey, maybe you don't want to go to university, but you're a really good carpenter. But you know, you can't just go build things. Like, you need to be able to pay taxes, you need to be able to maybe run a business, and like all these things. You know, whether if you're just building chairs. So I think we kind of right now we're lacking those, like a really clear path for somebody that maybe is troubled, but they want to be able to conform to our society, or at least they want the results. They want to be a successful carpenter. They have the skills, but that giving that opportunity to say, okay, well, here's the minimum you need to do to be able to understand, you know, the little bit of bureaucracy we're going to put in your way as an obstacle to low quality.
And that's essentially it, right? You're gonna, regardless of what you do, you're gonna have bills to pay. You're gonna have to.
You have to be able to read and write to exist in our society, right?
So
these days you just can't. Otherwise.
Exactly. You need those skills, and so we're definitely looking at schooling, and schooling is an important part of, you know, your grade 12. Okay, and then after that, what are you gonna do with your life? Like, you know, you need to. What is the lifestyle that you're living? What is the lifestyle that you desire to live? Where is it that you want to go to? And how much income do you need to create that? You know, like a lot of youth have very expensive taste.
Yeah, for sure.
The money they're making is not that, like, you know, well, if they don't have any bills to pay, sure. But if they have bills to pay and they have very expensive taste, where I just say to them, I'm like, got to get another job. If you're going to want to, I'm not judging you for your lifestyle, but if that's the lifestyle you want to live, you need to make more money. Right. So so something needs to change here.
Yeah, that's one thing, like with this whole the minimum wage argument, how everybody wants to keep jumping up the minimum wage. Like, I mean, I don't believe we live in a true free market. And I think people who have a skilled trade, like an expert carpenter or an expert mason, should make good money because they're an expert at their craft. But I don't think for something like, if you're just working at McDonald's, you know, and maybe if you're a manager, sure, but if you're just doing the bare minimum, I feel like that is a job for somebody that's just getting on their feet. Like, it's not supposed to be a life's purpose. We're not supposed to increase the minimum wage such that it doesn't incentivize people to take that next step. I think there's a danger in that. I know I'm sure people would have many arguments about that, but, and I mean, and the problem too is there's not a lot of people, but there's maybe, let's say 10% of our population that just isn't capable of doing more than that. Yeah. And then what do you do for those people?
And I personally think, at least with what I'm seeing, is there needs to be more building of self-esteem and that kind of self-identity in order for there to be a rise in people saying, I can do that job. I think that's what is lacking in people wanting to go forward, especially people that are on that space of taking on minimum wage jobs and working those jobs for many, many, many years. You know, it's once you master that, then, or you've been doing it for so many years that you can do it with your eyes closed. Well, why aren't you moving? Why aren't you doing something different? And is it because you don't think you can? not because like, not capability, but more in your head or your belief system, and I think that is where if we are wanting to move forward, let's talk about belief systems and how they're limiting and how that's impacting the jobs we take and the money we're making.
That and like fundamental fear of change. Because I think in that way we're it's a little bit of a more of a, everybody, you got to do jobs for the society to run. However, how much of that job is taken by a candidate because of fear, and how much of it is taken because you surely have found out this is what you love and you're meant to do. I mean, as long as we were talking about having these more practical, like society integration skills in high school, the other thing I think is lacking is psychology. I think I got really lucky in university. I have an engineering degree, so it was all very technical stuff. Right. But the university is about, historically about putting out broadly educated young people. Right. And so I had to choose a non-technical elective, and I chose psychology. And like I use that on a daily basis. I reference that course. Right. Like that is the most valuable training I've ever received in my life, is that one class in human psychology, learning how the brain works and how all these tricks you can play on yourself to lose motivation and become addicted and I can't believe, but it's not that complex. It's the most complex thing in the universe, the human consciousness that we know of, right? But what I mean is like we've boiled it down to some heuristics where you can learn them. And like the idea of locus of control is a very simple concept, right? Like some people blame everything on external factors in their life, and some people blame themselves for everything and or attribute all the success to themselves. Right. And people exist on a spectrum. That's not a complex idea. It's a pretty simple idea. There's no reason we can't teach that to kids in grade 10. I had a subordinate in the Army who he was the guy that was always showing up late, always leaving a mess for everybody else in the shop to clean up, constantly in trouble. And this was an organization, like a professional organization with generally really hardworking guys. And he was in my office to speak to me, which means like he had upset his master corporal enough to bring it to his sergeant, which upset the sergeant enough to bring it to the warrant, who was bringing it to me. It's escalated at this point. It's not his first time being in trouble. And he was explaining to me, I let him talk for 20 minutes and explain to me how, everybody is kind of turned against him and how none of this stuff was his fault, right? Oh, I only did this because I had to do this. And, I was only given that because they knew I didn't like this. And it's just this crazy story. And I had a whiteboard there, erase what was on it, and draw lines, locus of control. And I explained the concept in like 50 words. And all I said is, where do you think you are? Have you heard of this? And no. Where do you think you are? And he looked at it for about 10 seconds and he's like, probably pretty far to the external, right? I said, yeah. And that like, it sorts you out. He just sat there, because whereas I could have said like, oh, I could have become his enemy, just like the rest of the leaders were his enemy. But for whatever reason, he thought I was kind of on his side. I wasn't, I had great leaders in that platoon, and they were correct in their assessment of his lack of effort and incompetence. Not in general. Like he was a good kid and he was smart and stuff like that. But he just had that habit of blaming everything external, and it was becoming toxic. Right. Right. Yeah. But that, like, why was that kid not shown that in high school? I don't know why psychology is not taught.
Yeah, I have an agreement. I think learning about yourself is valuable, especially in high school, I think. And learning about yourself will actually help you be in relationship with other people, because that's something that we have to do as humans. For basic need is to connect and with other humans, then it'd be useful to understand ourselves in order to then be in relationship with other humans. Right? Yeah.
Well, even that idea, right? Like some people haven't been exposed to that idea that like how we basically, if you don't get enough human contact, you die. Right. Or self-destruct, like you kill yourself.
That's so monumental. Like if you do not have enough human contact, you die. It's like that's how important humans are, Like
there's, what was that? I feel like it was somewhere in the Soviet Union where there was this, or somewhere Eastern European, where there was this country where they somehow spread some sort of propaganda. Or I would bring it up on the laptop, but I don't feel like it right now. But essentially there was this like orphanages of abandoned babies. And all these babies basically died because they weren't touched. They weren't like, they were given everything they need, like food, water, shelter, but they weren't given that interaction, and it was just failure to thrive. Like it was a horrible tragedy.
So sad. Like touch is your most basic need for babies. It's the way they connect, right? And
I guess at that point it's the only way they can interact. Well, not the only way they can interact.
That's like the first thing that they do when your baby's born. They make sure that they put the baby on the mom's chest.
Okay.
Like directly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the first point of contact.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to, like, I think there's studies to prove that secures the attachment in a very different way between the parent and the child.
So I wonder if you're adopting a baby and you're the adopted mother, would they give that baby right away to the adopted mother to create that bond?
Yeah, I think any sort of surrogate, even if it's a mom, adopted mom, I think it's the bonding. I can't remember if there were I remember reading something about this in school, but it's way too long. But
I've definitely heard the anecdotes of it going the other way, where it's like a woman who says she's going to give up her baby for adoption, holds her baby for the first time, and is like, nope.
No. Yeah. I mean, I haven't experienced it myself, but I hear like it's phenomenal. My sister just gave birth in February last year, and she's, the way I love hearing birth stories because each person's story is going to be different in some way. And she says, like, obviously it's like unlike anything else you've experienced, but she's like that first contact, like, it's like there's no words for it. Like you have no words. Yeah. It's like a tiny human that just like comes out of you, and then it's just is in like outside of your body then, and it's just connected to your being through your skin. I mean, that's just blows my mind.
I think like motherhood and fatherhood is downplayed in our society because we have these such grand expectations because we're exposed to celebrity and people like Elon Musk, so that it's like having a child seems like such a small experience in retrospect, like in relation to the Tesla Motor Company. But I don't think it is, like as far as like your own internal consciousness is, like that is your most real thing, and that kind of bringing another, like it's unlimited potential that you're bringing into the world, right? Like it could be the next Elon Musk, so or the next Hitler.
Yeah,
if you fuck it up.
I think you're right. I think parenthood is something that, like any other, it's a calling. I really truly believe this. If you are if you feel like you're called to be, and it requires a certain skill set, I think. And you're right, because you're raising a human. You've signed up for it, and you desire it deeply. It's not coming from this. I mean, hopefully, I mean, in that way, I think it's a calling. If you're, like you said, you feel like you're offering something, you have something to offer, and you it's very intentional. You understand you have something you want to pass on, or you want to share, or you want to. In my eyes, I think you're chosen to guide another human. Essentially, is how I see parenthood.
Yeah, and I think that's like one of the most unfair but real things in our society is that it's so much more taxing on women to do that than it is on men, right? Because like
it's an interesting conversation.
Men can have that, like, oh, I want to be a dad,
right?
And you don't really like, you have to give up some things. But not nearly as much. Nearly as much. I think I would say, like, if somebody said they had to give up just as much to be a dad as they did to be a mom, I'd be like, I think they must be. There's something they're repressing, like it's like physical. and giving birth, like it's dangerous. Like it's not dangerous to have a baby if you're a man. I mean, dangerous that you could lose your wife. Like, sure. And yeah, so I suppose it is actually.
Oh man. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that like kind of that postmodern feminist is like, they really don't like that idea of a woman like sacrificing everything in her life and to have that really profound experience of raising a child and giving up other things because a man just doesn't have to. So then they want it to be even, but it's just not even. Like
it's a very interesting question. I'll speak about this from my perspective as a woman, because I know each woman's going to have a different perspective on this. But
of course,
my take on it, my personal take on it is, for me personally, I think I've always wanted to have children.
Yeah.
I think I was in university and I was talking to a friend of mine and I said, "Can I tell you a secret?" And she said, "Well," I was like, my secret, most deepest desire is to be barefoot and pregnant and cooking in the kitchen." And it was, and I say it was a secret because as a modern day woman, it didn't feel proud to say that.
No, I think that's horrible. Yeah. Not to be barefoot. I think the most disgusting thing I could ever see is a barefoot pregnant woman. No. I think that's like such a beautiful thing. Like that's life coming into being, and somebody who think it's bad and like not, you should be pursuing a career.
Yeah. But this is, it's so interesting, right? Because I was doing my degree. I remember because I was doing my degree in psychology and I was almost minoring in women's studies. And, my perception of what I was like almost caught in this, like, this road of like, okay, I want to pursue, I've gone to school, I've done so many years of school. Like, what does that mean to me as a woman? Does that mean that I still want to, go to, like, I still want to be able to raise a child, have a partner, and how do I get there? It was like, okay, I have to find a job. And I want to make it so that it's equal. So I'm going to, get these jobs, save a lot of money. So when I take time off with my child, I've earned the right to. Okay. And this was my perception, like really it was. It was like, if I'm going to take those years off to spend some time with my baby, then I'd have to create that situation for me.
Yeah. You can't rely on somebody else for that.
I can't rely on somebody else for that. And is it right for me to be able to say to somebody, well, or create that kind of dependence and it's okay? Or would that make me a modern day woman?
Mm-hmm. So what's your conclusion? At least, what are your thoughts now?
It's interesting because I think a part of that narrative is still there. I still want to have my own, whatever it may be, of whatever it is that I do. I always want to preserve my own independence and identity. I'm not so caught up about the financial bit as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because I understand with more years that I'm living in my life that it's two people signing up for something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's and there has to be a deep desire from a partner. I think that's one of the things that I've understood. They're not doing me a favor by partnering up with me in order to raise this child.
Yeah. That funding is, they have to want that child. You
have to desire or deeply desire to want to be a father if you're going to want to be a father, as well as if you're going to be a mother. And it's not just a role that you take on just because your father was a father and so you're just going to just go ahead and just do that. And my father was a farmer, so I'm going to just be a farmer. It's not like that,
Yeah.
It's not like that with parenthood. And I wish there was a little bit more like felt awareness about these things.
And that's what I am most scared about in our culture, is that the role of the mother is diminished.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you should have a kid, and then if you're going to be significant in our society, you better get right back to work.
Right.
Because no big deal that you're a mom.
Right.
Like, that is, if you're just relying on a man to provide you sustenance and you're raising 2 or 3 kids, like, you're like you're just you're just low, like, you're just low status. And I think that's that's dangerous.
That is. And it's, I think, I'm doing a little bit of readings right now about womb wisdom, and there's wisdom in our wombs and feeling, and there's so much wisdom there for women.
You have to explain that.
And what I mean by that is our feelings are wisdom as women, is our superpower. I really truly believe this.
Okay.
And in order to feel those feelings, you need a container and space for it. I have friends that actually create a certain space around the time of their period.
Okay.
So that they give themselves that time. They're not working these crazy hours.
To deal with their emotions.
So that they can actually feel their feelings during that time. And it's so important because our cycles are actually, our monthly cycles have some intelligence in them in how they're built. And if we adhere to those cycles and the feelings that come and the emotions that come through those cycles, it can help us navigate our lives in a different way as women.
So how would that actually look in terms of a calendar?
So you have a monthly calendar based on your when you get your period.
Okay.
And when it ends, and you keep a record of feelings for each of those days, and then after.
I mean, the giving yourself space part. Would you take a couple days off work? Or
yeah, you take off a couple days. You'd create some more space. You wouldn't plan things during then. So what if we designed our lives like that suited our bodies?
Yeah.
What if? I mean, it's just a thought, right? Yeah. And I'm saying this from this perspective of I'm trying it out now. And I've been actually when I would actually have my first or second day, I would take in the sick days, because if I take care of my health, then I can work, right? Like your functionality is quote unquote better.
Yeah.
It's working for you. And so rather to get in touch with your body in a way that actually works for you as a woman. So intelligent and paramount. And yet it's taken me a while to get there and to be curious about it enough to follow it. And then
well, it's certainly at odds to the current societal narrative that men and women are they're just interchangeable. It's the exact same thing.
Right. And it's not,
with
right?
Different genitalia, yeah.
It's so interesting because there's so much. I'm 31 and I'm learning about these things now. How it would have been so different if I learned about it perhaps when I was 20. And
certainly not that it would be right or wrong, but another culture, if you were in a more traditional Indian culture, or a more traditional Canadian culture, 100 years ago, there would be a woman would basically go to a young girl and say, hey, this is the role of a woman in society, and here's how you're supposed to be. And it wouldn't just be what is now kind of the narrative is well, there is no role for women in society and there's no role for men. It's just, you just do the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting because, the first years when I did get my period, the way my parents, my mom took care of it and what we were taught. So, my mom was like, no heavy bags. You got to sit. You got to be in, this is your hot water bag and this is what you do. And, very kindness and a lot of belly massages. My mom would come massage my belly with oil.
Oh, yeah.
And this was a very a time to rest and take care and be with it. And, of course, as when you were a teenager to then becoming a young adult and being part of our society, there's certain roles that you need to take up. And so, you follow the different, this is the go-to way. You got to go to work, you got to go do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. You have things to do, places to be, activities to be involved in. So am I making a big fuss about this? Should I be taking the care to do this? Do I continue taking care to do this? And so it's taken me a while to kind of adhere to that, respect that, and stick with it, and be ferocious about it in that way that, no, this is my time that I'm going to take.
And you feel it makes you more powerful now that you've been adhering to it.
Yeah. Of course. I think so. I really truly believe so, because understanding how I work or how I operate can help me better navigate how I want to be treated and how I want to, go like work within this world. And it really, it's helpful for me, but it's also helpful for people around me.
Yeah.
You know, once you understand how you operate, you can show somebody, this is how I operate. What I mean by that is saying, well, you design life according to the way you work.
Yeah.
You know, rather than have life designed for a way that you should definitely work. Like it's
Yeah.
There's something wrong with that kind of logic.
Well, yeah, I think our society needs to get a bit more sophisticated in our approach. Like, you know, before it was definitely too static in that you have their gender roles, which are
Your pink jobs and blue jobs, yeah.
Yeah, too prescriptive. Or just like, you know, you're a stay-at-home mom or you're a spinster, you know? And now I think it's too much like diminishing what it is to be a woman and also diminishing what it is to be a man. I think there needs to be like a mature look at this and like a redefinition and an emphasis on freedom. Like I think you know, a man should be free to be a nurse or a teacher and a woman should be free to be an engineer. But I don't think we should tell women like you have to go into like science, technology or engineering if you want to be successful. Like,
yeah, I think yes, I am in agreement. I think I find that there's no need to, like, there's this kind of like proof. I have to prove this is who I am. I think human, male or female, you know, and it's like, what if you suspended that you need to prove who you are and just figured out who you are?
Yeah.
You know, just figure out who you are. Just go within, spend some time by yourself, you know, understand what your thoughts are. And, you know, spend some time with yourself so you can understand who you are. Then you can go the direction you desire, you know, and whether it be you want to take up engineering or not. And then you don't have to subscribe to any model of like, I need to be this woman or this kind of woman or that kind of woman. Yeah. You can just be the kind of woman you desire to be. And isn't that going to be more simple?
Yeah. And I think though, one thing I would credit our society with is we've created an amazing space for women to have a career and have a family. And you know, that balance is there. But I feel like most of the reason, like what we're talking about is more of like an individual pressure and a societal pressure. But not necessarily, like not from the patriarchy. It's more from, I think it's less from society at large and more from these extremist groups that are diminishing motherhood, which I think it's actually these kind of like this modern like hyper forward-thinking feminist ideologies are actually more like working against women now. In that,
I think it's partly to do with, and this is my perception of the way things have been. You know, we've come in, like when women came into the workforce, you know, we were taking up different types of jobs, maybe more secretarial jobs and typewriting and that kind of nursing. Those are very like what we call pink. I'd call them pink jobs, say, for instance. And then that went on to us wanting to do other things and then really opening ourselves up to this idea that, okay, they can be, we've said, okay, we're capable of doing any job that there is really, like, you know, other than even the ones that require a certain amount of physical strength. I think there's always been somebody has gone and pushed that boundary or that envelope, right? There's always going to be outliers, right? Yeah. And so, if you want to go do that job for sure. It's so I don't necessarily think so I think, we were competing for wanting equality in that way. Like we want to be able to try for these jobs and not feel like we're being discriminated against, a woman being discriminated against, right?
So, and that was definitely the case.
Yeah. And I think in that way, there was certain like, how do you call them? Like standards that we had to kind of like, I can do this. Yeah, I can do this too, you know? And so that's when I think that more of that competitiveness came through. And so now we're then competing for the same jobs, men and women. right? And so it's not a gender thing anymore. And I think that's where that comes from. And yeah, you can call it patriarchy. It's one way of saying it, but like, it's just the way the systems worked. Like there was a dominant and there was the non-dominant. You know, that's the way I see it. And, you know, there's some societies that are more female dominant. You know, what I mean by that is they have more decision-making abilities. It doesn't mean, to me, it doesn't mean it's a good or bad thing. It's just, do you have a space to embody the intelligence and essence of your gender? You know, the ones that since the day, like since our ancestors have certain qualities that they've passed down through our genetic material that you embody as a male and I embody as a female, it's wise for me to use that, you know. And yeah, so that's my perception of what's kind of happened. And in terms of the other ideas that women have about women, this is the part where I think there needs to be a little there's healing happening, I think, on a collective for women, is that one woman is not stronger than the other. This is a very interesting
one role. Yeah.
You're just on a spectrum. Everybody's like got different like abilities, ideas, concepts, perceptions, sense of self, you know. And if you are raising children and that's what you desire to do, versus if you're an engineer or you're a bodybuilder or you're an athlete as a woman, you're doing what you desire to do in your life, and go do it.
I wondered too, and this is a bit of a tangent, but one of my close friends, Justin, him and his wife live in it's a pretty stereotypical like nuclear family. She doesn't work, she raises the kids, but she has a master's degree in psychology. Wow. She's a super smart woman. This is just the path she's chosen, is to be a full-time mom. And she's a very, very good mom. And I wonder if this kind of like diminishment of motherhood from the elites in our society, like the universities, is leading towards this. Because what I see it is now on the other side, there's almost this rebound that's like, some people say like every mom is good. Like motherhood is just, moms are great. It's like, well, there's still a hierarchy of competence of mothers. And that's one thing she talks about a lot, is she notices there's a lot of very incompetent mothers that are doing a very poor job raising weak, whiny children. And, you know, I think maybe if we were more open about saying like, you know, respecting mothers and respecting like how well a good mother raises children, people that are like these highly competent women would be more likely to go into that role.
I think that's I like that you mentioned it like that. It's like, if you looked at motherhood as an ambition, then there would be competency. Yeah. Just like any other job role. And I think, you know, I mean, if you looked at motherhood as a role, then they would have competency in it, just like you would have an engineer and I'm
just going to shut off that heater. Keep turning on and off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'd have competency within that, and then we can talk about it. But I think we are in a sensitive culture where it's like the most horrible thing to say somebody's quote unquote like, you know, it's not doing their job, or they're doing their job poorly. That's like not something that I think we want to address. And it's like, well, you know, why are they not doing it properly? And then there's other factors, right? And so it's a very interesting, I think, it's a very interesting space to kind of go into and talk about, because there's lots of factors that will contribute to how you are, you know, how are you going to be
as a mother,
as a mom.
And I think the interesting thing, if you like, I'll just lay out a scenario. Like, let's just say you're a hyper successful businesswoman who's working in the office 14 hours a day, and you have 2 children, you know, 3 and 5 years old, hardly ever see your mom. totally misbehaving on Ritalin and all this stuff, most people would say, oh, you know, she's working hard, and pay so much respect to her and a mom. And the assumption that is like, because she's a mom, she's obviously a great mom. It's like, no, you know, you can be a great lawyer and be a terrible mom. And by pretending she's a great mom, you're really taking away, in my opinion, from somebody like Caitlin that actually is a great mom and really spends the time at it and puts a ton of mental energy into raising like their daughters. And you meet them, you know, these are just great little people. And you know, there are some kids I'm sure just have behavioral problems, and they also got lucky, but their kids are just like wonderful little children. I think they're like 3, 6, and 9 or something like that. And it's her, like she's a great mom. And to say everybody's a great mom, it's just not true. Like,
yeah. I think, see, this is it. It's like our concepts of moms are changing. Like, we're looking at a spectrum of like mothers that come in that are, they're not, it's like a spectrum, like I would say, right? So if Caitlin, your friend, Justin's wife, is doing most of the raising, it's only her, right, that's doing most of the raising, and he's participating too, but that's her job role, like that she's taken on, and she dearly wants it. Whereas I think, I mean, I know moms that are working and the dad wants to take on more of the dad role. So how does that play into account? Like, you know, you're fulfilling that role of the main caregiver, but it's the father that's doing it more than the mother, or whatever it may be. And so if you've chosen that, you've chosen that. You know, as long as there's a primary caregiver that's involved, and you've sorted yourself out, and one person wants to be really involved but still wants to have a family, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I guess more the case I was talking about is not like if the guy is staying home and raising the kids, that's different. Like, I think that's everybody's going to work out their own situation, but I more meant in this case where they're both working these long hours, like both the parents, and there was nobody, like a nanny or daycare and all this kind of, or even if they don't have a nanny that comes in, but they're just so mentally exhausted when they come home that they don't have the energy to put in.
I find that we have to get real about, like, okay, if you're not doing the majority of the bonding and the parenting, then who is? And if it is the nanny, are you picking, you know, somebody that is going to be that person that's going to be able to raise your child, and like, are you doing that very consciously? Like, are you intentionally planning for your family like that? And these are important conversations to have, because we have different types of families these days, you know? So it's like we don't have the nuclear family anymore. You know, the result of our society is going into workforces, and like the both genders going into the workforces as competitively and ambitiously as they have been, creates like these different scenarios of like the outcomes of different types of families. But I'm with you in that the care needs to be like, somebody needs to take up the caretaking role of raising these children, because it's a massive role.
I think it has to be respected more.
I think so.
But respected within a hierarchy, as everything is a hierarchy of competence, right? Like, we can't pretend they're all good, and we also can't pretend that it's less than a career.
Yeah, and I also think that that's perhaps some of the reasons why that because of the lack of, not lack of, but like, you know, the way, I mean, the introduction of medication to our society is also, you know, the way we're using medication with children is also very big.
You're an anti-vaxxer?
What's that?
I'm just kidding. I was accusing you of being an anti-vaccinator.
Yeah, no, not like, when I say medication, I mean Ritalin and like the amount of ADHD and
totally.
And
like, I'm sure, I'm not a professional, I'm sure those things have their purpose, but they're an amphetamine, right? And to be giving to that, like, I wish I remembered the numbers, but it's a lot of kids that are on that.
There are, and It's interesting to see, right? Like some of the questions I ask with some of the kids that are on medication is like when they start to go on it is, how is it helping you? Like, are you noticing a change? How much of a change do you notice? And, you know, that combined with them seeing somebody that's actually speaking to them, talking to them, sorting out things and moving through your emotions or your feelings, right? So you're not just using the medication to be able to treat the child and solve a symptom, because it's not a symptom. You need to find a system that works for you.
What sort of patterns do you notice when you ask children about this?
It depends. Some of them feel with some of the depression medications and anxiety medications is numbness, which, you know, after a couple, like the older kids are aware enough to try it and understand that it's not like, I don't want to do this, and I sense that this is the space I'm going into, so I'm going to speak to the person that I usually speak with, like my counselor or therapist or whatever, and just make sure I have more appointments with them, so they can sense the way they operate and their patterns, and that they don't want to take medication or want to take medication based on that.
That's a very mature outlook.
Yeah, but it takes a while, right? Like you have to figure out what this medication is doing for each body. So it's interesting.
It'd be hard. I would think if I was that age, I would find it hard to be even so aware of my own consciousness to notice what kind of change a medication like that would be having.
Yeah. And that's what we're teaching, right? Like when I work with my clients, I teach a lot of awareness, self-awareness, try to record your feelings, write about how you feel, like spend time in that space, because it's an important thing to start to get to know. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to note the changes or work towards whatever you're trying to work to get through.
Yeah.
You know.
So these practices that you have, I actually meant to ask this earlier. Have you is this just your own, you know, way of doing it? Like what sort of professional guidances are given and procedures that you have to follow?
So I did my degree in psychology, which I think has been monumental in the way I think. And
you don't have to have a psychology degree to be a youth counselor?
You could have, so you have to do youth and child worker diploma degree.
Okay.
So there's different trainings that you can get. So social work, psychology, youth and child.
Yeah. So in the field.
In the field, right? And that's the training that you need to do this job. Personally, I found that after doing it the way I've been taught to do it, I've also gained my own style.
Yeah.
And I think that was pivotal to be able to do this work from a heart space. You know, they teach you about not attaching to your client, about certain rules and boundaries that you need to follow, which I'm in agreement with. And
but it sounds like you are also violating those.
Yeah, I think after a while of starting to get to know it, and I think the field has changed quite a bit since I went to school, that you find the values of the place that you work with. So I worked at a community center, and you know, the values that the organization uphold, you know, do they match my values? Is a good thing to think about if you're going to work in within an organization, you know.
Yeah.
So is it respected? Is my autonomy respected? You know, is my role and the way I do my work respected and encouraged, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I'd have these conversations with the person that would overlook my team lead, and you know, that style is encouraged, and so it followed it, you know.
Yeah, but I think it's important. It's kind of circling back to what we were talking before, is gaining competence in the basics before you move on to like these. So important. A rule like, you know, don't become personally attached to your clients. I think you have to adhere. Like, I'm just guessing, but you adhere to that at first, and you see the value in that adherence. And once you can do that competently, then you know when that's okay to break that rule.
Yeah, and it's.
But if you just went into it being like, screw the rules, those guys don't know anything.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna get attached to every client. It'd probably be a disaster.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And also like things like you know, they teach you about counseling. So you have to hear, and that's the part that I remember learning about. So one of the counseling techniques is you listen to what they say and you repeat the words that they said back to them.
Yeah.
And so in the beginning, you do this very robotically. And then, you know, kids pick up and they're like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you I just said that. Why did you just say what I just said? And then you're just like, oh, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. So you don't just repeat back what they said. You figure, you listen and you listen more. And then you listen more after that, you know?
Yeah.
And
then articulate what they mean, not just what they said.
Yeah. And it takes a little bit of practice. For sure, it's taken me some practice. And
is that what you're doing? Trying to get at the deeper level of what they're getting at?
I think after a while of working with youth, you end up, for me, in my experience, you go deeper. Yeah, you just do. Because they're navigating their own inner landscapes of like, how do I make it through? And then you're with them navigating that inner landscape of like, what about this? What about this? What about this? You're just offering, right? Or you're just like,
that technique of repeating back what they said, is that cognitive behavioral therapy?
That's a counseling technique. It's just a
Okay.
basic counseling technique, like repeat, you know, just repeat what they say. So it's called, what is it called? I can't remember right now, but, yeah, it's a technique where you reframe what they said.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because
that's even in like popular culture is active listening, right?
Yeah.
I've heard of
Active listening and passive listening, how to actively listen. And sometimes they just want you to listen. Sometimes they're looking for something, 2 words, anything, you know. You can't do too much of the listening too. Sometimes they're just like, well, you're not going to say anything. That means you don't care, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a fine dance between like listening, deeply listening, and then knowing when, you know, you're ready to have a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
And say something. So how to use your words is so important.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, I think those are 2 of the most powerful abilities you can have in our society is being a good listener and being a good speaker. It's the, you know, it's a big part of the reason it's the reason really I started a podcast. I don't really expect there's 10,000 people going to listen to this.
Hey, you never know, Greg.
Yeah, you never know, right? But I certainly think it's forcing me to be a better listener. I try to do that in day-to-day life anyway, but certainly when you know people are listening to it, you don't want to sound like a fool.
Right.
So you know, do that. And I think hearing myself speak and hopefully some asshole on YouTube chirps in and, you know, clearly articulates all my inadequacies for me, that would be useful, painful and useful, right?
Yeah. It's I think it's definitely a skill to have and to share with the world, you know, some more listening.
Yeah.
Deep listening and conversing, because we want to hear what you have to say, you know. I think we forget, when I was a student learning about these techniques, I'm like, can't say anything. Elisha, you have too much of an opinion. Don't say anything. It's like, no, you have to learn the tact of deeply listening and then also understanding where you can have a voice, because you need, like, to have a voice is so important in this world.
And
share it too.
Yeah, I think that is also something that's been manipulated. It's like to have a voice, but to use it like in the realm in which you're competent in, and to compel people to listen by like having them be motivated because what you're saying is interesting, not because you're screaming at them and telling them they need to listen because you represent this or you represent that. Like that's more of like the narrative that always bothers me when somebody's just shouting. It's like, say something interestingly enough that people want to listen to you. Yeah.
I think you can talk at somebody, for sure. And you can speak in this way that, or you can just speak in a way that, I think approaching anything with curiosity and wonderment, you know, you're just talking about something because it's interesting to you and you're curious about it.
Yeah.
It provokes curiosity in the listener, you know?
Mm-hmm.
They are now interested in the curious questions that you've been talking about or have. And
yeah, it's definitely like both are a skill. And I was even saying more like, I definitely agree as a life skill, but also just career wise too. Like
for sure.
I want to make sure that I'm setting myself up to do well in my field, which is still being defined, but in a professional workplace, being able to articulate your ideas on the spot and then also, come up with a compelling argument for doing something the way you want it to be done. And especially when you genuinely believe in the organization you're working for and you want the best for it. If you can't articulate, because you should be the expert in your field. So you should be able to compel your boss to make the changes in your workspace that are going to best benefit the company. And if you can't do that, I think you're failing in your work, no matter how well you're doing it. If you're just saying, well, my boss is an idiot and it isn't doing this. It's like, well, you also have to take personal responsibility because you haven't been able to convince him. You haven't been able to articulate your piece well enough. And, sometimes there's really hard cases. Sometimes there's easy cases, but it's always a bit your fault, I think.
Yeah. I personally find that if you're being competent in your job, then you encourage competency from whoever it is that is above you and below you, or if you have that hierarchy or beside you,
Yeah.
But like competency encourages competency in my experience. Because then that's what a team is. That's what builds the team. And I think to have somebody who is in a position that I'm working in, who has more of the leadership reins in terms of being above me, I would like to see that if they are like as a person that's in a certain position, I need to be able to respect them, which would mean that there had to be some competency. And I think we can oftentimes confuse competency with hierarchy. And I personally don't believe one necessarily translates into the other. So hierarchy doesn't necessarily mean competency.
Agreed. Yeah. I think like there would be some correlation, but certainly at all levels of the hierarchy, you can find incredibly intelligent and motivated people. And you can also find
the opposite,
the opposite at every level of the hierarchy. It's actually the reason I right away in the military, I attempted and was successful in transitioning to the special forces is because I got the opportunity to work with them early. And it wasn't just the leaders in the special forces. It was also the soldiers. And it was actually mostly the soldiers. I was like, if I'm given the opportunity to command men, which is already like a crazy responsibility, like too much for a child. It's only because we're like, it's just the military way that you're given that responsibility very young. Like these are the kind of guys I want to have that, relationship with. Right. Cause they're just so incredibly competent and hardworking that I can learn from them as well. And then as well as like working for a boss that can be a mentor to you. That was something very, very appealing to me. So in the army, you can have that for sure, but you're always going to have bad apples. Right. And it might be your boss. It's going to be one of your bosses because you have many layers of bosses. And one of those is generally always going to be a prick. Yeah. And you're always going to have, like in the army as an officer, it's something like, I would say it's like 50% of your time at least is spent on 10% of your, maybe not even 10%. There's like, out of a platoon of 35 guys, there's like usually 2 that you spend so much time on just because they're just creating issues, right? And not just for you, like for everybody else around them, because they're avoiding work, which creates a bunch of resentment, which the whole team works slower and, and it creates work for their direct supervisor. And it's a lot of work for these people. Whereas, and of course, there's still like people who are more or less competent within the special forces, but it's generally just all elevated and people are there because they want to be there. And so if somebody is lagging behind, they're motivated to get better. So it creates a very different work environment. It's a lot more pressure and a lot of people burn out during it because there's so much pressure to do better. but yeah, it's very rewarding. And that kind of tribe aspect we were talking about before the podcast I think is a lot stronger in an organization like that.
Yeah, there's this, I think when you have shared values, it can change the way your tribe is built, because it's not built on these are the values that you should embody. It's these are the values that you resonate with. And I think building a tribe from that space of like you finding your own authentic voice and sense of self, or on your own personal journeys, and then finding the other people along your path. I mean, there's something more beautiful than creating tribe in that way.
Yeah. I think that's the allure. I imagine like a lot of the troubled youth you deal with, they have this alluring tribe of people involved in bad things that, and they might see the appeal of doing well in school and, pursuing something more meaningful with their life, but there's that pull.
Yeah, it's with youth. It's just about, I find that they do have that. They have that, the different cohorts of people that are in their lives, and they're influencing them in different ways. Some more positive, some more not that positive, more negative, you could say. And it's the choices. You always have a choice at each point in your life, and what choice is it that you're going to make. And it's one choice it doesn't mean that you'll only go down one path. It's just you make this one choice, you'll see where it takes you. Then you make another choice and you'll see where that takes you.
Yeah.
And in that way you create your own fortune, So but very much. I think if they're motivated to keep finding like-minded people that are within the spaces and changes that they're making as well, then they create their own tribes as well. And I'm hoping that that's the way they go,
Yeah. Well, I really like that idea of, listening to them and, relating to them enough that they confide in you. Like, what's their secret vision of the future that they're embarrassed, to tell their friends, because they're going to say, you want to be a pregnant lady with bare feet. Like, that's so stupid. And, that's so naive. Like, but like whatever is their secret, like maybe for them, it's maybe like this guy, he's bad at math but maybe he wants to be a doctor, and his friends will all laugh at him.
Yeah.
But like, getting close enough to them that you can get them to confide that in you, and then really like hold that up. And because as a youth, it's a sensitive time. It's easy for easy for you to be crushed, right? And if you don't have somebody to hold up that torch, you can kind of be wandering around blind, right? That can be dropped easily. So I think it's an important thing that you did there. I respect that a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun, Greg. It's a lot of fun. I get to learn a lot more than I've learned a lot about hip hop from one of my kids, and their resiliency teaches me resiliency,
Yeah.
So it's, in lots of ways, it's not one or the other. It's like we're both learning. It's just I have more of the official teacher role.
Yeah.
It's, if you really look into it, because gosh, experience is your biggest teacher. And if you put yourself in these situations where you get to experience, then you get to learn,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some raw, beautiful talent in youth, and you can harness that and show them that this is a gift that you can put forward. And then you have to do it with yourself too. They hold me accountable. It's not like I can preach without doing it myself. So I got to put out my gifts as well. And then, so when that's not resonating either, then I have to also take some time to go figure my own gifts out and whether I'm putting it forward. So it's interesting. There's so much of an accountability piece. And I think that's what inspires me to do a lot of the things that I do.
Yeah. It sounds like to me that you're almost shifting into like a mentorship role rather than like trying to be a prescriptive teacher.
Yeah. I don't like this idea of a teacher is very one that has a certain ring to it, that it doesn't suit me in this way. I like more of like the word guide, or perhaps the word mentor. Yeah, sure. because you really are just holding. You're just holding space.
Yeah.
Essentially, that's really the job, and really like. I love when I see what another person desires to do and to hold that for them. Like that's my favorite part, is to be the witness.
Yeah.
You know, there's this beautiful joy in seeing somebody grow, and seeing this is where they desire to be, and they're taking the steps to get to somewhere to there. And it's, I mean, I easily like tear up when I have those moments. I mean, it's just, it was not even real, and it's become real for them. And there's nothing like there's nothing that can compare it to that moment, and like being in that moment with another.
Yeah.
For me.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually something I'm looking for the opposite, I suppose, right now. Like part of the reason, I mean, I got a job when I moved down here. I thought it was a great job.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was offered this other job a month later. And, you know, I took a fairly significant pay cut to get it because I saw, you know, a couple of the guys that were in the leadership of this company are doing some amazing things, and they're guys that I really respect, and I want that. I would like that mentorship, and I didn't see the same opportunity at the place I was at.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it more a place I could be successful and you know, do well in that company, but I didn't see myself having like a strong role model to learn from.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I want like any of these guys, not that I want to directly emulate them, but I want to make sure I'm in a position where I have somebody I really respect and I can emulate aspects of them.
Yeah, and I think that it's brave of you to admit in this way that if it is that you're looking for, then you go seek that out versus just the successful part and the job that pays you, and then, you know, that you could be a good candidate at whatever job. You know, I think our intent with something is so important because that could be the stepping stone to so many other beautiful moments.
Yeah.
You know, and that's like, that is key, I think, to me, according to me, to like finding our own successes and milestones in our life, is that what is it that I desire to do and how can I create that within a given situation, you know? And
yeah,
it's really cool, I think, to mentor with somebody or to learn from somebody and to be open to that, because we're constantly learning. You know, if you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to information, you're opening yourself up to learning. So it is learning in some capacity to be able to learn from another human who's physically like there in your presence teaching you. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think you like, you know, I could read, you know, the great philosophers, but I don't think it sinks in as deeply as when you, like, you know, it's like just what we were talking before. A story is more powerful than data, even though data should be more compelling. But I think seeing somebody act out a trait is even more powerful.
Yeah,
because you're watching that story unfold right in front of your eyes and seeing the consequences, and I don't mean bad, I mean positive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Like it ties in so much of those things we were talking about, like human connection, and then, you know, so you have that need met, and then you're getting to learn something profound. You know, I think so many of these roles, like mentors and things like that, they have the embodiment of parenthood in them, you know, and that's why they're so appealing.
Yeah.
And we are constantly in roles of parenthood and like motherhood, or like mothering or fathering or whatever it may be, and at all stages in our life we're looking for those people, and they've come in different forms for me. And
do you feel like you're acting out the roles that your mother and father, like those stories that played out in front of your eyes? Do you feel like you're acting those out?
Perhaps not very much of the stories in that way, that they were just, you know, cyclical, in that I'm just repeating and regurgitating. But I would say more of the essence.
Yeah.
You know, I think love is something that cannot be, it's unique language, you know, to compassionately care for another. This come with some time and the people that have taught me, yes, and yeah, and to be able to then hold space from like more of a neutral standpoint, but yet with heart. It's practice.
And you think you got that from your parents or your mother?
My mom's more of she's a fierce lion.
Okay.
And my dad's more of, he's probably got more of the soft personality.
Yeah.
Among the two. So yeah, I think I have the fierceness of my mom for sure.
Yeah.
And I think I have the softness of my father.
Has that come out in your counseling of youth?
It does.
Yeah.
I understand where to put the boundaries and
you
know, and say absolutely none of that shit, you know, when it's none of that shit, that won't work. And you got to take responsibility for what you've done. And
they can sense that comes from a deep spot, and it's not just posturing. Like you really, when you say none of it, you mean it.
I mean it. Yeah. Cause I'm usually my nature is usually very compassionate and very soft. And then, I understand also where to put those boundaries down. I'm quite direct in the way I approach things. And so I find it's well received, you know, I mean, they still see me. So they still want to meet me. So I'm guessing that's what it is. But my perception is that, you know, lighthearted and, you know, we'll chat about some stuff and relaxed and until it needs to be. And so there's a certain amount of relationship building and softness that is required, I think.
Yeah, but I think the boundaries is important
too. It's so important.
I don't think, and I don't even mean just for you. No. I think children, like anybody, it's not exciting to interact with somebody that's a total pushover.
No, I personally think that they're looking for the boundary. They're looking for where the structure is. They're looking to see what's your outline. So the reason why children or youth or anybody or humans in general, like adults, will push is because they want to see where's your spot where you're going to say no. Yeah. Right. And we want to find that so we know where to play. Yeah. We want to find that with a human to know, okay, and that's a respectable thing. If you see in another that they have a boundary, you're more likely to respect them than to be like, whatever. Right. Yeah. And so we're learning throughout our lives of how it is that we want to be loved or respected or whatever it may be. I would want to say loved more than respected because I don't know, respect is one of those ones, but loved, you know, how do I want to be received? How do I want to be what's okay with me, what's not okay with me, you know, and really not just be like it's not okay with that other worker that you do that, so it can be with me. No, you got to you have to figure out what it is that works for you. Yeah. You know, what is your personal boundaries of?
Yeah, I feel like boundaries gets a bad rap. Like I don't, the word sounds very new agey. Yeah. But it's something I've recently, the last couple of years done some thinking about. And, you know, I've certainly been guilty, and I see this a lot with other people, is you let somebody cross those boundaries. Not that you'd even have articulated them to yourself, but you let somebody cross them. And then they cross them and they just kind of pushing it a little bit. And then you flip out on them. And you're like, what are you doing? And that's not really fair to them because they didn't realize they were transgressing this boundary that you hadn't even articulated to yourself. Yeah. I think like knowing those yourself and being firm.
And I personally find that the two things that you're talking about takes practice. Totally. So putting a boundary down for me has been usually excruciating. Yeah. It's painful and I don't like it. And I had lots of things around it, you know, and it would make me a certain person that I didn't want to be. And because you have an idea of how you desire to be, and it's just like, well, how you desire to be versus who you are, two very different things. And you can't get upset about it. If you're getting upset about something, that means it's a boundary. Yeah. So you have to figure out what your boundary is by some trial and errors. Yeah. You know, so it takes a bit of practice, this boundary thing. Yeah. And then to implement it, you know, and know that it's not going to always be received with a big smile and, okay, that was your boundary. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Awesome. No, it's not going to always be received like that. That means a lot of temporary end in relationships perhaps, or
because there has to be, if you really mean no, there has to be consequences or people will just keep pushing past, right?
Exactly. And the consequences are where that you figure out what your boundary was, right? Like if you understood that was it and that's it for you, then and it's ended a relationship, for instance, or it's changed a relationship, then you've now figured out, okay, this is what's, so it was a very important thing to me then.
Yeah.
And how do you determine that?
Yeah, I guess mostly through experience.
Through experience. Yeah. And it's been a journey, but I find that it's a very valuable tool with working with youth, but just interacting with other people in my life, you know, and how to still be like, not have your heart get all hard, you know, still have a soft heart, but have like boundaries, you know. It's a very interesting one. That's the one that I've struggled with too. It's like, you don't want to be a hard ass.
Yeah.
You know, and you don't want to just be like this, like, you know, just have boundaries, but I'm not going to just have a soft heart. It's like, no, you got to still like love and like have compassion and like connect deeply and, you know, be around other humans, but you need to have these boundaries. And so, or you realize
there's nuance to it for sure.
There is nuance to it for sure. So it's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah, cool. Well, that was a great talk. We're almost at 2 hours.
Perfect.
You want to call it a night?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, great. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
This was amazing, Greg.
Okay.
So good.
Yeah, wicked. Glad to have you. And you know what? Actually, before we end, you're going through a life transition right now. You should talk a little bit about what services you're offering.
Well, I'm currently revamping my website, Cheeky Monkey Caters, and there will be some offerings on there soon. I haven't really had some time to kind of sit down and refine the details, but something exciting, hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, maybe we can wait to release this until that's done.
Okay.
And I'll put the link in the description.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Elisha.
Thanks, Greg.
Elisha is heading to work in Costa Rica over the winter, but when she returns, she will be operating her catering business full-time. She specializes in supporting retreats with delicious and nourishing meals. Reach out to Elisha on Instagram or via her website, cheekymonkeycaters.com. Seeing how long overdue the second episode is, I want to get started on the third right away. I've got a couple ideas, but I would love any local Victoria guest suggestions. Hit me up at contrapodcast@gmail.com, and I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Elisha. Thanks for listening.